G'day, I'm Greg from HR Success. A difficult time for all, of course, particularly employers knowing what to do with their staff and whatnot. So I thought I'd cover today just a couple of questions that we're getting from a lot of local small business employers. The first one being, can I require that my staff be vaccinated? The answer to that is yes, you can, if indeed that is a lawful and reasonable request. So what constitutes a lawful and reasonable request or direction of staff to get vaccinated? There's three reasons. The first reason relates to public health orders. So if there's a public health order or a government direction of some description that requires staff working in your premises to be vaccinated, then yes, you can require those staff to be vaccinated, and you should require them to be vaccinated so that you're ensuring compliance with those public health orders or government directions. The second reason that you can lawfully and reasonably require staff to be vaccinated is where that decision is supported by an employment contract, a registered agreement or an enterprise agreement or something of that nature. So in those cases you can also require that staff be vaccinated. And the third and final reason is where it's a lawful and reasonable direction relating to work health and safety. So this is where it gets a bit more complicated. Whether indeed a decision to require staff to be vaccinated is lawful and reasonable for ensuring work health and safety comes down to an assessment of the workplace. So it could be the nature of the workplace, the frequency and nature of contact with customers and clients, the location of the premises, all those sorts of things need to be taken into account. So we actually recommend that all businesses that are considering a compulsory vaccination policy undertake a full work health and safety risk assessment so that they can determine the level of risk that is in fact involved. And if it's determined that there is in fact a decent level of risk, then potentially that requirement for compulsory vaccination is lawful and reasonable. There are some resources on the Safe Work Australia website that offer some guidance around undertaking those risk assessments, or we can provide you with a referral to a work health and safety specialist that we frequently work with. So they're the three reasons. Supported by a public health order or government direction. The second reason is if compulsory vaccinations are a requirement of an employment contract, an enterprise agreement or other registered agreement. And the third one where it's a lawful and reasonable direction based on work health and safety, in which case it should be supported by a risk assessment in our view. We also recommend that if you are moving in that direction, that you consider developing a formal policy relating to vaccinations, and it's really important that you do consult with your staff and others potentially impacted by that policy before that policy is finalised and implemented. The final thing we'd say about compulsory vaccinations is that you need to be sure that you don't discriminate against people that can't have vaccinations for a genuine, valid medical reason, or for example, an age-related reason. So just be careful about the requirements relevant to the discrimination legislation. The other question that we're getting frequently asked at the moment by local business owners relates to asking employees to provide evidence of their vaccination status. So can you do it? Can't you do it? Well, you can do it if in fact it's a lawful and reasonable direction to require people to have vaccinations. So again, as previous, there's those three reasons by which you might lawfully and reasonably require somebody to have vaccinations to enter the premises. If you've got one of those three reasons, then yes, in our view, it's reasonable to ask people to provide evidence of their vaccination status. If, however, you don't have a compulsory vaccination requirement or there's no public health order in place or anything of that nature, then it's probably not reasonable to ask people for their vaccination status, or at least require them to provide that evidence. You can certainly ask them, but can you require employees in that case to provide evidence of their vaccination status if you don't actually have it as a compulsory requirement? No, you can't. So by all means ask them, but can't require them. The other thing we'd say about providing evidence of vaccinations is if you are asking or seeking or requiring that evidence, we would recommend that the safest option is to just view that evidence, so cite it and say, well, thanks very much, and then off you go. Don't, generally speaking, take a copy or retain a record of their vaccination status, because that gets quite complicated in terms of the privacy legislation and so on. You can do it, but if you are going to copy and retain a record, be sure that you're appropriately covering yourself in terms of the privacy legislation. If you just want to go the easy route, just cite the evidence, say thanks very much, move on.